Two guys in the dark.
In fall of 2013, I was in my first year of college. I loved my campus, and even though I loved my roommate, when a private room in another dorm opened up, I took it because I thought I would study better in my own space. After years of sharing rooms with my sister at home, I was also excited to be alone for the first time. The new dorm was a lot cheaper, and not what I was used to. It was kind of the campus joke, the oldest dorm still standing. The community floor plan didn't afford residents much privacy, but everyone told them we're like family here, and it was definitely true. There was always someone in the kitchen, the study rooms, in the lobby watching TV, or hanging out on the benches outside. You couldn't help but meet people everywhere that you went. About a month after moving in, I started seeing a lot of one guy in particular. He was always sitting outside, greeting me when I came in or out. I'd say hi just to be nice, but I couldn't tell if he lived in the dorm or if he was even a student. It seemed as if he sat on the bench 24/7. After so many days, he eventually asked me for my phone number. When I told him that I wouldn't give it to a stranger, he got really mad and started screaming at me, calling me a bitch, and saying no one wouldn't want you anyways. I just walked away, rushing to go meet my friends to go get away from campus, and him for a weekend. After that day, though, things got even worse. I couldn't go anywhere without him seeing and trying to corner me. Every time I came near the dorm, he was there. I started walking the long way and going in the back door, hoping that I wouldn't run into him in the elevator or the stairwell, but I still didn't feel safe. I saw him a few times a week, and he'd always yell at me, run after me, or go on long rants about how I had to have sex with him. Once I brought a friend to my dorm, and when we didn't respond to his threats, he threw a glass bottle at us. He just missed my head as it broke on the door beside me. About a month later, in November of 2013, I finally reached my breaking point. The guy would wait outside the dorm and follow me whenever I left, wherever I went. I went out to go get dinner one afternoon, and he stayed right behind me, even getting in the same lane as me. But instead of ordering, he just turned around and followed me through the food court. I was too scared to go sit down. I just kept on walking, hoping to lose him in a crowd. When I finally turned around, I saw him standing not too far away with a group of friends. He waved and smiled. I just stared back, and as if there was no one else around, he started yelling, saying he was going to strangle me, cut my throat, and rape me. He ended with, "That's what happens when you don't speak to me, bitch." I walked straight out of the food court into the campus police department. The officer who met me in the lobby was the first person to put a name on what was happening. I was being stalked. Once I reported the stalker to the police, I felt like a weight had been lifted. But I quickly realized that everything wasn't going to get better right away. I didn't know what his name or if he even lived in my dorm, so I couldn't just identify him. I had to write a detailed report of everything that happened that day and go over it with multiple police officers. That night, one of them came to my dorm. I was supposed to walk around and come to the back office if I saw him. Thankfully, he was in the lobby, so I could finally ID him to the police. The officer sent me back to my dorm, and I hoped that would be the end of it. But my problems only multiplied. Everyone in the lobby saw, so the whole dorm was talking about me. For someone who seemed crazy, the stalker had a lot of friends everywhere I went. People were calling me a snitch. Once I was cornered by a group of men who yelled at me loud enough for everyone on the squad to hear. They wanted me to apologize for getting him in trouble and tell the police that I was lying because they said it was obviously made up. Day by day, it felt like things were just getting worse for me, and better for him. I was told that they moved the stalker to another dorm while they looked into the case, and that I'd have to meet with the assistant dean of students. One day on my way to a meeting, I ran into the stalker. I thought he had already been arrested and left campus. I knew he had been instructed not to talk to me, but he walked up to me anyways and grabbed me by the arm. He begged me to tell the police to just drop the case, saying that it was just a joke. You don't have to be like this. I pulled away and started running, but he ran right after me. I don't know when or where I lost him, but when I arrived at the campus police station a few moments later, he wasn't behind me anymore. That day, an officer took me to the county courthouse to talk to a judge and get an arrest warrant. The stalker and his friends weren't the only people who made it difficult. One of the officers who took my statement asked repeatedly if I had done something to lead him on, and if it was possible that I was only scared because I wasn't used to being approached by men. I learned later that he didn't act on the arrest warrant until almost 3 weeks after the judge had signed it, because he didn't think that it was a serious matter. I also had trouble with the dean's office. I once missed an email from the assistant dean requesting another meeting. By the time that I read it, I was at work and I couldn't leave. I had to wait days to get another meeting, but when I did, the AD told me he was beginning to doubt my story, because if I was really scared, I would have met with him earlier. I couldn't believe it. I had traded work shifts, skipped classes, and missed sorority meetings to meet with campus police and administration, and to be shuttled between campus and the courthouse. I was more angry than scared, because at that point, I felt like I was being jerked around. I got the feeling that people wouldn't believe me unless I was completely hysterical. As much as I tried not to focus on it, the case eventually had an impact on my class and work performance. Returning from Thanksgiving break, I confided in one of my peer counselors. She helped me get in contact with a man who worked in campus administration, who told me he would come with me to the dean's office if it made me feel better. With his help, I finally got to meet with the dean of students, who promised me that he was going to work on my case and that I would communicate with him instead of the AD. He also said that I have to attend a hearing where the stalker and I would both tell our stories and let campus faculty decide what to do about it. I didn't want to go, but the dean said it might look bad if I didn't. If they decided that my story wasn't believable, I would be punished for filing a false report or breaking the university's honor code. I was even angrier now. First, I didn't seem scared enough for them, and now a fear of being in the same room as my stalker was perceived as dishonesty. After about a week later, I got an email from the dean. I was to make a list of all interactions I had with the stalker, including dates, times, locations, what was said, and more. It was hard, but at that point, I was glad that I had told people about the stalking. I looked through texts with my boyfriend and sorority sisters, Facebook messages to my family, and old journal entries. I put together as many details as possible, submitted it to the dean, and waited for my reply. Finally, after what seemed like the longest and worst semester ever, I received a notification that I wouldn't have to attend a hearing after all. My stalker was being expelled from the university. He would be arrested if he ever came on campus again. Last year, I was served a subpoena in my dorm. The case was being continued by the city police, and they didn't bother to notify me until the day before the court date, because the university's decision to expel him stood regardless of the city's ruling. And because I didn't feel prepared to go to court, I decided to ask to drop the charges. I met with the prosecutor earlier the next morning and told her that I wasn't interested in pursuing the case. That was the last time that I ever saw my stalker. I now have my own apartment, very close to campus. When I'm leaving work or meetings at night, I try to go with a group or stay on the phone with someone. My sorority sisters are always checking in on me, and that makes me feel safe and cared for. Almost 2 years later, I'm not very scared of being alone anymore, but it does scare me to know that many other people on my campus have gone through the same thing that I did, and probably didn't get as much help with it as I did. Even though millions of people are stalked in the United States every single year, it's been referred to as a silent epidemic because so few of those people report it. Although it was difficult to go through, I'm glad that I reported my stalking. Sometimes I will struggle with my decision. I'm afraid that people will find out and look at me differently, or that some people still don't believe me. I was afraid to come across as weak, but in reality, I have strength now that I didn't have before. I'm a 22-year-old male, and I'm a security guard who was working a graveyard shift from 7 p.m. to 7 a.m. I was posted at a library where my main task was to watch for trespassers, particularly some older male who keeps coming back to the library overnight. The library had a bolo out for him, and he mailed me a photo of him so that I was at the lookout. Around 1, I got up and went out on patrol. I approached the door to go outside. I saw two homeless people sitting outside on a bench with a shopping cart that happened to have been covered by a tarp. The tarp had stains all over it. Being creeped out already, I hesitated to even go outside. I thought about using the on-site cell phone to call the police department, as that is what I'm supposed to do anyways. However, I decided it wouldn't be right to just call without letting the couple know that they were trespassing, and give them the opportunity to go away without incident, as it would have been less work for me anyways. I have to call PD. I have to make an incident report. So I just grabbed my flashlight and then walked outside, identifying myself and letting the couple know that they needed to leave immediately. They were a younger white couple. Neither one matched the description of the suspect. The man was pacing back and forth. He smoked a cigarette, writing something on a notepad. The woman was sitting down, just staring. So anyways, I told them both to leave. The woman starts arguing about how she's homeless, and how the police already told her that she could stay. I knew that was obviously a lie, and told her that she needed to leave right now. We got onto the subject about how they shouldn't be here. I kept trying to explain to her that she was loitering, and that wasn't allowed here. She began to argue with me about the definition of it, and just being a pain in the butt. This whole time, the man did absolutely nothing. He was just in his own little world, continuing to walk around and smoke constantly. I knew that I wasn't going to get anywhere by being nice, so I told them that I would be calling the police. I went back inside to the security room and then called. 10 minutes went by after I had called the police. They apparently had left. A little while later, the police had arrived. I went to go talk to them. They didn't seem to care much. Once they saw that they were gone, they just told me to call them back if anything happened. So I go back out, and I'm making my way around the building. I run into the same woman who I just called the police on. She was now by herself. The man wasn't anywhere in sight. She had a very odd stance and posture. I can't really describe, but if you've ever played any of the Silent Hill games, her posture was similar to the way the nurses stand. I didn't even say anything. She didn't seem to notice me at all. I went back to where the police were still parked and told them that she was still on the premises. They got out of their car and walked with me to where she was standing and told her that she had to leave. She started telling them that she had permission to be there and that the sheriff told her that she was allowed to be there. They told her that she wasn't. And eventually she left, or so I thought. After the police finally left, I went back inside to make a cup of coffee. I decided I wanted a little fresh air. I decided to stand outside, and I drank my coffee. It was around 2 a.m. at this point. Now this is where things get really creepy. Next to the library parking lot is a big park with a playground. I started to hear what sounded like whispering, followed by menacing laughter. I look over to where the noise was, and barely managed to spot the couple. The man had returned, and was standing next to the woman from earlier. They were just staring. Because it was so dark, I could only see their silhouettes. Their eyes were literally glowing, kind of like a person's eyes glow in a picture. The woman laughed while the man said in a slow, monotone voice all the different ways that he could hurt me. He said it loud enough so that I could understand what he was saying, and I knew that he was talking about me. He was talking to her, but was talking about cutting my face off, and then skinning me. Then he shouts that uniform doesn't make you tough. At that point, I just got too sketched out, went inside to finish my shift. The rest of the night was pretty unsettling too, because I kept hearing voices outside and tapping on the walls and doors. I just knew that it was them. Luckily, they couldn't get inside without a key card. When my shift ended, I went to my car, and there was a sticky note that read, "Next time you won't be so lucky," with a crosshair symbol next to the words. Needless to say, I am never returning to that library overnight ever again. The first time that he asked me out, I said no. We had known each other in art school, and he always struck me as a little off. Not that he wasn't brilliant, not that he didn't have a body that sparked a million fantasies, and eyes so icy blue that they could freeze sunlight, but he was so obviously damaged, so obviously unstable. I wanted to be smarter than my hormones. So I said that I'm sorry, I can't. He picked me up, lifted me into his arms, and walked me across the flooded street. He said that he would ask me again the next day. It was a bold move, and I noticed. It made me nervous. Over the next few weeks, he called me every day. He emailed me twice as often, love poems laced with sexual innuendos, and filled with the specifications of the conversation. He seemed genuinely enamored by me, and finally, I relented. I told him that I'd go out with him. He earned a date. Over coffee, he told me about his abusive father and stepfather. He showed me the knife that he kept in his pocket of the corner leather jacket that he had. I tried to look unfazed and calm. I didn't ask him back to my place, but I agreed to see him once again. I saw him every weekend for almost 2 months, before he told me that he loved me. After a few weeks of that, I started saying it back. I must love him, I thought. After countless hours of listening to him cry on the phone in the wee hours of the morning, telling him that he was good enough, that he deserved compassion, and that he deserved affection. I thought that that meant I loved him, or I was obligated to love him. Winter came, and he fought with his mother. She kicked him out of the house, and he told me, as a blizzard rolled in, that he was sleeping in his car, that he didn't care if he froze to death. For the first time, I invited him to my apartment, to sleep on the couch. He wasn't my boyfriend. I wasn't sleeping with him. I let him know I wasn't interested in either of those things, but he could sleep on the couch. When he closed my apartment door behind him, he shut out everything about the world that made sense. He yelled at me and sobbed in turn, threatened suicide, and climbed uninvited into my bed. He hurt me, emotionally and physically. And when I finally lost the ability to continue to stop him, he raped me in the dawn light on my own bed. Then he put on his shoes and left. I didn't answer the phone for days and didn't leave the house. I lost my job, too traumatized to move. My answering machine filled with messages from him, all professing his love. As soon as I gathered enough of my courage, I wrote him a letter, telling him never to contact me again. But every few hours, another call, another email. A well-meaning neighbor let him into the building, and he stood outside my apartment door, sobbing until I called the police. When they arrived, I declined to file a report. It had been more than a week since the assault. What did I have to prove my story to them? The calls and messages were relentless. After 2 months and 3 changed phone numbers and email addresses, I couldn't face living alone anymore. I moved in with friends, male friends I thought I might deter him. I told all of our mutual acquaintances he had raped me and wouldn't leave me alone. For a few days, the phone calls became more plaintive and desperate, and then they turned ugly. The same talent he had used to woo me with beautiful poetry produced threat after threat, sent from anonymous email addresses, but laced with hints. He threatened to kidnap me from the coffee shop that I frequented and skin me alive. He told me I looked beautiful when I walked into the grocery store, mentioned the clothing that I wore that day, and how many bags of groceries I took home. He threatened to cut out my heart with the knife that I'd seen on our first date. I stopped leaving the house. I saved every letter, every note, and every voicemail. For 2 years I wondered when enough would be enough, when the dam would break and I would have the evidence I needed to take to the police. But nothing had his name on it. Everything was so careful. No email address used twice. No names. Every threat sent in the form of a fiction story, starring fantasy characters. It was all my word against his. But one day I couldn't handle it anymore, not knowing where else to go. I went to Planned Parenthood. They listened, they believed me, and did not blame me, but referred me to a psychiatrist and to the courthouse to file an order of protection. When I arrived at the courthouse, I had the police report from when I declined to name him, but I told officers my ex wouldn't leave my front door. 2 years earlier, I was told that I would have to report the assault to the police before I could proceed. Reporting the rape and stalking to the police was nearly more traumatic than the experience itself. As I read story after story aloud, the officers rolled their eyes and sighed in a bored sort of way. "This sounds like a bad breakup," they said, "not a crime. If you were raped, why wait 2 years to say anything? How do you know that's even about you, or from him? Aren't you reading an awful lot into this?" At the end of the afternoon, one of the officers shrugged. "I can't file any charges over this, but I can tell him to leave you alone if you want, scare him for you." I agreed. I don't know what the officer did or said, but it must have worked. In the 8 years since, I have only heard from him once, 5 years ago. Maybe an anonymous commenter online said something vague, not exactly threatening, but it sounded like him. I look for him in every anonymous comment that I receive. I won't step foot in the town where he lived, in the restaurant where he worked, in the coffee shops that he threatened to kidnap me from. I still fear him, but I think of him less and less. If I were to see him now, there is nothing that I would say to undo the trauma of years of abuse, or of nearly a decade of therapy to overcome what he's done to me. There is nothing that I could say to make him feel guilty. I believe his guilt drove him the whole time. Anything that I said would make things worse. And what I want most of all is to believe that it's really over. And if I were to say something to him, it wouldn't be over. It would still be happening. I look for him online, sometimes. I don't know why. It's a compulsion I can't stop. I think the biggest misconception about stalking is that it occurs in the real world only. That a stalker shows up on your doorstep. But most stalking is psychological. It's not having a shadow. It's more like having a spy in your life. Like having a spy in your head. With the access into your life, the internet gives nearly anyone. It's easy to learn your habits, to follow you digitally, if not physically. And real terror can occur without an actual contact at all. If you're being stalked, know you did not ask for this. Know you did not encourage this. Know that, as painful as getting help can be, it is worth it. I wish I hadn't waited so long, because there never was a definite proof. There probably never would have been, no matter how long I waited, and no matter how long anyone being stalked waits. Their abuser won't fall into some simple trick and identify themselves and their intentions. You have to believe that you will be heard, that the truth will come out despite the obstacles. You have to believe that you can ask for help, and it will arrive, even if it's not the help that you expected. There are resources so much better than I knew. If I could go back and tell myself then what I know now, I would tell myself to look for resources specifically for people being stalked, because they exist. Because there are people who can help so much more than an officer willing to threaten a suspect without accusing him of a crime. There is a better way, and you can find it. So this happened to me a few months ago. A new family recently moved into my neighborhood at first. They seemed pretty nice. It was a woman and a man, and their 2 kids. 1 boy and 1 girl. Since they were new, my family presented themselves to them and brought them a welcoming gift. Since they were unpacking, my family asked to help them. They accepted, which meant that I had to help. We started, so there was 1 box that caught my eye. As I went to go get it, the man had stopped me and said that he can get it. That's when I started to wonder, like crazy, what was in that box. That night at dinner, my family invited the new neighbors, but they declined, so it was just our family. I asked my mom if she knew what that box had, because it looked really weird. She told me that I should not judge, and probably it was just a private thing, so I shouldn't get into other people's business. Later that night, while I was sleeping, I heard our back door open and footsteps coming in. I locked my door and wanted to call the police, but then I would get in trouble, so I just left it like that. The next day I woke up and checked the back door. It was unlocked. I was creeped out and told my mom. I told her that I thought that family came in and did something to the house. She then called me crazy, and that I have to be respectful. And what if this was the other way around? After that, she told me that I have to hang out with the boy, because he left all his old friends at his old town, and he needed someone to play with. So later that day, I hung out with him at the park near my neighborhood. I asked for his name. He told me that it was Diego. My name is Diego. At first, I was like, oh my God, we have the same name. Then he said like Diego from Grachi. And there is a TV show I like to watch called Grachi. And a character's name is Diego. I was a little creeped at first, but then I shrugged it off as coincidence. Later that night, during dinner, I felt my family was being watched. After dinner, I was going to spend the night at my friend Jake's house. So the next day I ran into the boy and his mom. He asked how the sleepover was. I said, how did you know? He said your mom had told me. I went straight back into the house and asked my mom. She said she never said anything to one of them, and that they were lying. But then my mom said something that scared the fudge out of me. She said the neighbor's mom, let's call her Asia, asked if she could have the number to her doctor. My mom said that she never mentioned this to Asia. She then started to get suspicious. We secretly called my Uncle Larry, who is a police officer, to investigate the house to go see. He found something really chilling. It was a camera in the kitchen. It was hidden. That's when I remember someone came in the back door that leads to the kitchen. Since we already had enough evidence, we went to the neighbor's house, but they were not there. So we waited for when they came back an hour later. My uncle had knocked on the door. Asia opened it, and my uncle said that he was going to investigate. She said yes, but she had to do something first. My uncle said no, and she had to wait outside with her husband and the kids. Then my uncle told my mom he found something in the box. It was full of cameras, and they looked exactly like the one that he found. So the family had been spying on us this whole time. We ended up pressing charges, and that family moved somewhere else. In 11th grade, I had a falling out with my parents in a big way. I moved in with a friend whose parents owned a motel. They let me stay in one of the rooms with their daughter, and in exchange, I would help out as a chambermaid on weekends. They were a wonderful, accepting family. During this time at school, I took drama class as one of my high school electives. It was a mix of grade 11 and 12 students, including a 12th grade student named Doug. Not his real name. Doug was huge. I mean huge. About 6'4", I'm guessing. Well over about 250 pounds. He liked drumming and weed, and skipping school for the most part. In class, he would find ways to talk to me, and he didn't have a lot of friends, so I'd talk with him, no big deal. I was bullied a lot in younger grades, and I knew all about not having friends. I didn't see the harm. Over time, he became increasingly insistent I skip school with him. I kept making excuses because something about him bothered me. I tried to partner up quickly whenever we had to do it in drama, because Doug would always make a beeline for me. One morning when my friend and I left for school, we found an empty 26er of Jack Daniels outside of our door. We got into trouble over it, because our mom assumed that it was ours, and that we had drank it, or our friends did. We had no idea who had left it. The next day, another empty bottle, and the next day I started to get a sinking feeling. After all, it was no secret at school where I lived. The next drama class, I asked Doug, and he admitted that it was from him. I didn't know what to do, other than I felt it wouldn't be a good idea to make a big guy like him upset. So, I carefully told him not to come by because I was getting into trouble over the bottles. I figured if he thought that he was creating problems for me living there, he would stop. And he did. The next drama class, I performed a monologue where I was covered in fake blood. I think I was a car wash victim or something. Anyways, after it was over, I went to go clean up. When I got out of the washroom, I found out everyone had paired up for the next assignment, and by default, I ended up with Doug. Worse, he had picked our play, one that had a kissing scene in it. I didn't know what to do. How could I go to my teacher and explain? All I knew is that there was no way I could do this play. So I managed to convince Doug that the script was lame, and we should write our own. We created one about two people in line talking back and forth, and it's only at the end that you realize they are both dead and waiting in line to go to the hot place. Yeah, that's a dark shadow into my teen years. Pretty much. Rehearsing this play was the most terrifying part. We had to use those soundproof music rooms at the end of a hallway, buried in the drama auditorium, somewhere no one but band and drama kids went. One time as we practiced our lines, Doug got this look on his face. My gut shriveled. The room felt so small. The door had only had a slit window. All I could think about was how no one would be able to hear me. No one. I got out of there fast, said that I was sick, and I had to go home. Bottles started to appear on my doorstep again, and then finally a note. 21 pages of rambling and poetry that made up a "if I can't be with you" letter. Something inside me snapped. I was done trying to not make waves, done trying to keep everything under control. I confronted Doug about the note and said that if he ever came near me again, I would take it to the principal and the police. I told him I had given it to a friend for keepsake. Thankfully, it was near the end of the school year. Doug graduated, and I didn't see him again. Rehearsing this play was the most terrifying part. We had to use those soundproof music rooms at the end of the hallway, buried in the looking back. I should have gone to someone sooner, but I was embarrassed. Embarrassed by Doug's creepy attention. Embarrassed that I would have to talk to the school if it got out. I figured my teacher or the principal would think that I was overreacting. How could I try and convince them that I had a feeling that something was off? I had no real proof. Not until that note. It scares me how it would have turned out differently. If I had stayed in that room that day. If I'd let it go on any longer. If I hadn't listened to my intuition. Why am I telling you this story? Because my friend is going to Blog Hop to raise awareness of this very issue. Stalking. It's something that we don't talk about, and we should. Men can be the target, but often it's women. Looking for the signs, listening to what our bodies tell us. This is how we protect ourselves.
If you enjoyed this video, please subscribe, like, and hit the bell for notifications on future videos, and become a stalker of the night. And I'll see you next time.